Hi fourth graders, it's Mrs. Burke here with another video math lesson. Over the last 2 days you've learned how to add and subtract decimals. So today we're going to take a look at some word problems and then determine whether we need to add based on the scenario or subtract. And we're going to go over some strategies for adding and subtracting as well. So if you watched my adding decimals video on Tuesday, you saw that I use this grid paper to add and subtract decimals. The reason I do this is because when we add and subtract, the most important thing with decimals is that we keep our digits in the correct place value. So having this place value chart here ensures that my digits are going in the correct spot. Once I remove this chart, it gets a little trickier to make sure. So I'm going to start off doing 1 or 2 using my place value chart because this helps me prevent making any mistakes. And then for the last 1 or 2, I will do it without the place value chart, but I'll still use the tips and strategies from this to transfer it. Okay? So with word problems, we usually pay a lot of attention to keywords. And if you do see a keyword, that's a great tool for helping us decide what the operation is. But not every word problem is going to have an obvious math keyword. So for subtracting, you're not necessarily going to see the difference or less than. For adding, you don't always see altogether, in all. So we want to actually pay attention to just what's happening in the word problem and think about the actions of what's going on to help us determine whether we should add or subtract. So let's read a few word problems together. This one says a piece of fabric was 16 3/10 inches long. If 9 4/10 inches of the fabric is used to make a bandana, how much of the fabric remains? So this word problem does have a keyword that can give us a tip to the operation we're going to be using. And that keyword would be remains. And when we see remains, we're usually going to subtract. Now, just to make sure, let's think about the situation that's happening. So I'm starting with a piece of fabric that measures 16 3/10. Now think about what we're going to do to that fabric. You're going to use some of it. So if you're starting with a piece of fabric and you have to use a part of it, you're actually going to make the initial fabric smaller. So we're using 9 4/10. So that use can also stand as a little math keyword. So since I know that my amount is going to be smaller once I start using it, I know that my operation has to be subtraction. And when we subtract, we always take our total, 16 3/10, and subtract the second part, 9 4/10. So I'm going to do that using my place value chart. And what I like to do is I like to read the digits as I see them. So first things first, I always put my 2 decimal points. So decimal 1, decimal point 2 for my 2 numbers. The first number, 16 3/10, I see 1/6.3. So I can't start here in the ones place because I would have nowhere to put my 6. So I'm going to have to start with my tens for 16. 1/6.3. And that reads 16 3/10. For my second number, I'm taking away 9 4/10 or 9.4. 9 4/10. I have my 2 numbers. I'm going to put my operation because I'm subtracting them, and I start with my smallest place value, which here is tenths. Now luckily, both of my numbers go to the same place value, so I don't have to add any place value holders. I can just subtract starting in the tenths place. So if I have 3/10, I can't take away 4 of them. So I'm going to regroup. I can't regroup a decimal. It's not an actual place value, so I'm going to come to the ones. Go next door, get 10 more. So this becomes 5 ones. And I'm gonna add 10 to my 3/10 and I get 13/10. 13 minus 4 leaves me with 9/10. Decimal minus decimal is decimal. Now I have 5 ones that were regrouped minus 9. I can't take 9 away from 5, so I'm gonna go to my tens place and regroup. And that now becomes 15. 15 minus 9 is gonna give me 6. And here I have 0 minus 0, so I have 0. So my answer would be 6 and 9/10. And I feel confident because I have this nice place value chart that assures me my digits have been lined up in the correct place value. All right, let's look at another. It rained 4 1/1500 inches on Monday, and an additional 2 9/10 inches on Tuesday. What was the total amount of rainfall over the last 2 days? So this question luckily does have some obvious keywords to help me out here. First, I see this keyword here, additional. And right away that reminds me of adding, but let me keep checking. And over here it says, what is the total amount? And usually when I'm finding a total, I'm gonna be adding. So let's see if that makes sense. If I have this much rain on Monday, and then additional also means extra, so if I have extra rain on Tuesday, and they wanna know all together how much, yeah, I'm gonna have to add these numbers together. So I'm gonna come to my place value chart. First things first, my decimal and my decimal. And now let me read the digits that I have. 4 1/1500 is 4.15, and 2 9/10 is 2.9. Now this question I'm going to be adding, but it's slightly different from my last one because I notice here my first number goes to my hundredths place and my second number stops at my tenths place. I always want to make sure they both go to the same place value. And I can't just get rid of 5/100ths because that means I'm losing value. But I can add a place value here without giving any value by putting a 0. So now both of my numbers go to the hundredths place and I'm ready to add. 5 plus 0/100ths is 5/100ths. 1/10 plus 9/10 is going to be 10/10. So I need to regroup that. Decimal plus decimal is decimal. 4 plus 2 is 6, plus the 1 I regrouped is going to give me 7 5/100. All right, we'll do one more with my chart, and then I'll reluctantly do 2 without my chart, although I think the chart is a good tool to use. Okay. Max ran the 50-yard dash in 36 2/10 seconds. Doug ran it in 47 51/100 seconds. How much faster did Max run the dash than Doug? Now this question doesn't have any obvious keywords that jump out at us, but it does do something that's really important. It compares two people's results. Whenever you have a comparison in a word problem, you want to know how much faster, how much bigger, how much stronger, how much longer, how much heavier. Whenever you're comparing, you'll notice like that ER, faster, heavier, longer, shorter. Whenever you're comparing, right away we know to compare two things, you want to see, well, what's the difference? Difference is subtract. So anytime you're asked to compare two things, you're going to want to subtract to those numbers. So I know that Max was faster. Even though this is a bigger number, it's not faster. It means it took a bigger amount of time or a longer time. So Max was faster, but how much faster? So let's subtract these two numbers so we can find the difference or compare. All right, I'm going to use my place value chart one last time. And I'm gonna always start with my 2 decimal points because those never move. And I have 36 2/10 or 3/6.2. Then I have 47 51/100 or 47.51. Now it's questions like this that make me happy that I'm in the habit of always looking at my place values, because this can be a trap for some people if they don't practice those good habits. Now, just like my last problem, I always ask myself, do my numbers go to the same place value? And you can see here, my second number ends in the hundredths, but my first number stops in the tenths place. I never allow that to happen. I always make sure they finish in the same place value, and I can do that by adding a 0. So I'm gonna do that here. Now, when you add, your answer is not gonna change if you're missing that 0. However, when you subtract, this is a big trap a lot of students fall into. If they don't put that 0, a lot of times a student will say, remember, we're gonna be, oh wait, no, I have to, Miss Burke is making an adjustment. Even though I saw this number first, I'm glad we just did this number is bigger. I can't subtract a smaller number first. I have to put the bigger number on top. So 47 51/100 minus 36 2/10. Okay, sorry. So I have to put this 0 here. All right, now watch what happens. 1, take away 0 is 0. 5, take away 2/10, 3/10. Decimal minus decimal is decimal. 7 minus 6 is 1. 4 minus 3 is 1. So how much faster was Max? 11 30/100 faster. And you can see sometimes, just like I just did, we're in the habit of putting just the first number we see first. If you're subtracting, your greater number has to be first to subtract the smaller from. Okay? Now let's practice without my chart. I'll see you in a few minutes. You're not going away forever. Okay, here we go. In March, Jill's hair was 12 5/10 inches long. It grew another 2 65/100 inches in April. How long is Jill's hair now? Now, it's not asking how much longer, it's asking for the new length. So this one can be kind of tricky. It kind of sounds like, well, is this subtracting? But they don't want to know how much longer is it. They want to know how long is her hair. So I have to take what it was in March and then add on her April length. So I'm going to be adding 12 5/10 and then an extra 2 65/100. So even though I don't have my chart anymore, I still want to practice smart strategies, and I want to put my decimal point first. I can almost see a place value chart even though it's not there. And my first number says 12 5/10 or 12 decimal point 5. Then it says 2 65/100 or 2 decimal point 65. Now, before I solve this, I want to show you a trap that a lot of kids fall into. Because I put my decimal point first, I'm in good shape because I knew that my digits have to fall in line with where my decimal point is. However, a common trap that students fall into is they don't line up place values, but they line up digits, and they write it like this. They ignore the decimal point and they just write the numbers they see. They say 12 decimal 5, 2 decimal 6, 2 decimal 6, 5. And they line it up like this. Now, if you can see here, my numbers are a little shifted. And to us, that kind of feels weird because we like things to be nice and neat and in order. Although this looks nice and neat and orderly, these place values are not in the correct spot because this one here represents tens and this represents ones. So we can't add tens to ones in the same column. And this number here represents ones, where this digit represents tenths. So we can't add those together. So that's why having the place value chart, it doesn't make us feel like things are uneven. Where here it kind of feels that way. But as long as your decimal points are lined up, you're good to go. My next thing, I always like to make sure I have the same place values, so I'm gonna put a 0. Add them up, 0 plus 5 is 5, 5 plus 6 is 11, carry the 1. Decimal, decimal, decimal. 2 plus 2 is 4, plus 1 more is 5, and then 1 plus nothing is 15. So her hair now is 15 and 15/100 inches. All right, last one. Here we go. Try this one on your own. Use this if you'd like, or use your whiteboard and paper, but don't forget to line up those decimal points. Phil completed his homework in 1 5/10 hours. It took his brother 7,500 hours longer to do his. How long did it take Phil's brother to do his homework? All right, so I know right now, Phil, it took him 1.5 hours, 1.5. His brother's time has to be longer than 1 5/10. So his answer has to be bigger or greater. So in order to get a greater number, I have to add. If I subtract, my answer is going to be smaller. And we know that it took his brother longer, so that wouldn't make sense. So I'm going to add my two digits together, my two numbers. So here I have 1 5/10, and then I'm going to add 7,500. What's the first thing I place on my whiteboard? My decimal points. Decimal for Phil, decimal for his brother. Phil was 1 5/10. His brother starts over here, 7,500. So as you can see, it's kind of shifted. It looks weird on here. If we put it on here, we wouldn't even notice. But when you choose to do it without the mat, it might look a little weird. It's okay as long as you're using your decimal points in the same place value. And we're going to add those numbers together. Before I add, I like to make sure I have same place values, so I'll put a 0 in the hundredths there. Now it looks a little better. I can even put a 0 here. 0 plus 5/100 is 5/100. 7 plus 5/10 is 12/10. And then decimal plus decimal is decimal. 1 plus 1 is 2. So it took his brother 2 2/2500 hours. Does that make sense? Well, yes, because 2 2/2500 is more than Phil's 1 5/10, and we knew it took him longer. Okay? So that's how we answer, or how we can try and answer our word problems. Pay attention to keywords if they have some, but if they don't have it, think about what's happening in the situation. Do we need to get a bigger number, add, or a smaller number, subtract? These are great tools. Make one if you want. Otherwise, focus on those decimal points. Make sure they're lined up, okay? Have a great day, Stewart School, and I hope to see everybody at the parade today. Miss everyone.